El Chapo, the notorious drug lord who in 2015 toppled the list of the world's most wanted men for the second time, managed to evade authorities for decades. Even when he was caught, dramatic escapes and the incomprehensible ability to keep his narcotics empire running while imprisoned allowed him to amass a net worth of at least $1 billion. But finally, a pair of captures spearheaded by the Mexican Navy seem to have finally imprisoned him for good. How did they manage to take him down? The answer goes back decades before they went down. Welcome to our first episode of El Chapo's mistake that led to his arrest. Do remember to hit that like and subscribe button to stay updated with our future uploads. Born either in 1954 or 1957 as Joaquin Guzman Laurel, El Chapo rose to prominence as the founder of the Sinaloa cartel from 1989 onwards. The cartel became one of the most powerful drug trafficking rings in the world. Sadly, a life of crime seemed to be his destiny from the start. El Chapo's early years was marred by poverty and the outbursts of his abusive father, a man who himself was in the drug trade and would often take out his aggression on El Chapo and his mother. By the time he was in his teens, the boy who would become El Chapo had already been booted out of the family's home and was left to fend for himself. He would soon follow in his father's footsteps. Desperate for money, Guzman started selling marijuana on the streets of Mexico. Throughout the 1970s, he embarked on a slow rise that saw him go from the street pusher to a key trafficker within his home district of Sinaloa. He wasn't anywhere near being the kingpin he would become just yet, but by the time he reached his late 20s, El Chapo was working with a man who would prove key in his later era of drug dominance. The man was Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, the founder of the Guadalajara cartel, which trafficked cocaine into the United States and was generating an estimated $5 billion in revenue. 4 years after Gallardo was sent down, El Chapo founded the Sinaloa cartel, inheriting some of his boss' old territory in the process. Creativity was the driving force behind El Chapo's success. He found even more inventive ways to smuggle cocaine into the United States, with the most impressive being a series of tunnels that ran underneath the border between Mexico and the United States. Those tunnels could be as deep as 70 feet underground and were often built tall and wide enough for an adult to walk or ride through them while carrying their shipments of drugs. For every one of those tunnels the DEA closed, El Chapo found another way to sneak his drugs into the US. Other novel methods ranged from the simple, such as putting the drug in can that was labeled as chili peppers, to the indigenous. One method saw El Chapo stash cocaine powder within fire extinguishers that were shipped from Mexico to the US, given that dry powder extinguishers already contained a powder. It wasn't much work for El Chapo and his crew to substitute the legitimate chemical compound with his drugs to get them past airport security, and El Chapo's organization kept growing. By the 1990s, he was sending cocaine, marijuana, heroin, and methamphetamine to 5 continents, making it the largest international drug operation in the world. El Chapo also benefited from the fading of the Colombian cartels that had been so prominent in the 1970s and 1980s. As Cali and Medellin started to wane, El Chapo took on more territory. He also became more vicious. Within the Sinaloa cartel, he began forming gangs: Los Taxis, Los Lobos, Los Negros, Los Chachos, and several more, all operated somewhat autonomously, though with the collective goal of growing the cartel's boss empire. The men who joined these gangs have been accused of collectively committing over 1,000 murders in Mexico alone, likely with many more in other countries, alongside untold casualties caused by fighting with other cartels. These labor activities couldn't go unnoticed for long. Despite his effort to keep a low profile, El Chapo found himself on the radar of both the DEA and the FBI by the early 1990s. However, neither would be successful in capturing the drug lord. Instead, El Chapo was fighting captured in 1993 by the Guatemalan army while relaxing at a hotel in Tapachula. He was handed over to Mexican authorities 2 days later and sent back to his home country for trial. He was initially imprisoned at the Federal Social Redemption Center No. 1, also known as the La Palma, with his trial seeing the drug lord receiving Mexico's maximum prison sentence of 20 years and 9 months for the crimes of drug trafficking, bribery, and criminal association. More convictions would follow. In 1995, El Chapo was transferred to the Federal Center for Social Rehabilitation 2, or Pianete Grande, where he was convicted for several other crimes, including drug trafficking and possession of firearms. He was also tried for the murder of the Cardinal of Tampo, though a judge dismissed that charge, and El Chapo would have served no time for it. That should have been the end of his story, but it was just the beginning. El Chapo somehow kept finding ways to keep running his empire from behind bars. He was generous with his bribes to the guards, through which he was able to arrange conjugal visits and meetings with cartel members to keep his operation running. That alone would have been embarrassing enough for Mexico, were it not for other issues, which is that El Chapo was becoming a legend in his own country. Many of the villagers in his home district of Sinaloa saw him as a Robin Hood-esque figure who had risen from poverty to become the most famous man the region had ever produced. It also can't escape mentions that El Chapo drug exploit poured money into Sinaloa, gave jobs, however illegitimate, to hundreds of men, helping them climb out of the very poverty the drug lord had experienced himself. To them, he wasn't a crazed mass murderer, he was a legend legend, and that legend only grew when El Chapo carried out his first escape in 2001. The story goes that El Chapo bribed a host of prison guards and employees to enable his escape from Puente Grande. One of those guards were Francisco Camberos, also known as El Chito or the Silent One. He was responsible for opening El Chapo's cell doors and ushering him into the laundry cart. El Chito pushed El Chapo down the strangely unguarded hallway of the prison, coming to a set of electronic doors that had been opened by another guard. Those doors led into a parking lot where El Chapo moved from the laundry cart into the trunk of the Chevrolet Monte Carlo before being driven away. There was just one guard on duty in the parking lot at the time. Though some disputed his account, it is certain that he received inside help. Following escape, a several investigation in Puente Grande led to the arrest of 71 of the prison's employees, with the warden even falling under suspicion. El Chapo did not care. He was out and free to continue running his cartel from the outside. This period of freedom brought renewed violence to the Sinaloa region. According to Forbes, the annual tally of murders in the region was around 400 in 2007, likely due to a need of reasserting dominance. El Chapo's cartel started killing rivals and others. The murder rate rose around 750 in 2008, just under 1,500 in 2009, and finally reached a peak of just under 2,500 by 2010. El Chapo was back, and his cartel was more dangerous than ever. Between 2001 and 2013, El Chapo increased his security enormously. He was shadowed by an entourage of armed guards at all times, practically being treated like a head of state during a visit to another country. He used part of his billion-dollar-plus fortune to buy bulletproof vehicles, private airplanes, and even all-terrain vehicles he could use to conduct a quick escape if the authorities ever got too close. With all this investment in his own security, El Chapo seemed confident in his ability to evade authorities. Eyewitness accounts even claimed that he would often walk into restaurants with his gunmen, ordering everybody to turn off their cell phones so he could enjoy a meal. He got away with it. He drew his legends because he would then pay the tabs of everyone in the restaurant. But El Chapo was growing overconfident. By 2013, Mexico security forces were already working on another plan to capture him. That is, saw them penetrating his inner circle, resulting in the arrest of several of his top lieutenants, including Mario Nunez, a former Sinaloa cartel member believed to be a complicit in at least 350 murders ordered by El Chapo. Combining these captures with information from wiretaps tips from the informant and the occasional confessions, Mexican authorities were slowly getting closer to figure out the cartel boss whereabouts. In 2014, they finally had a location, but just sending law enforcement after him wouldn't be enough. No, now it's time for the Mexican Navy to come into play. For the 13 years since El Chapo's escape, he had become a top target for both Mexico and the United States, to the point where the US was offering a $5 million reward for any information that led to his capture. Ultimately, it wouldn't need to make a payout. On February 12, 2014, the Procuraduría General de la República, or PGR, captured a high-ranking Sinaloa cartel chief named Daniel Fernandez, also known as El Pelacas. El Pelacas did not talk, but that did not matter because he was carrying something that gave the Mexican Navy all they needed: 20 cell phones filled with contacts for the PGR to investigate. Many of the contacts had numbers that used Sinaloa dialing code. The investigators quickly concluded that at least some of those contacts would be cartel associates of El Pelacas. More raids followed. A day after the capture of El Pelacas, the PGR, Mexican Federal Police, and the Mexican Navy jointly conducted a raid that led to the arrest of Joel Enrique Sandoval Romero, otherwise known as L-19. It was another huge capture, as L-19 was believed to have murdered a security chief working for El Chapo's rival, El Mayo. However, L-19 wouldn't break. Instead, it was one of the 4 associates who were arrested alongside him that gave the Mexican authorities the information they needed. One of the cell phones they were carrying belonged to El Chapo. More traces followed. On February 16, 2014, American authorities were able to use the data that Mexico authorities had gathered to track down El Condo, Carlos Manuel Ramirez. El Condo was El Chapo's chief of communications, and through him came more information. The US and Mexico discovered the names of other facilitators in the Sinaloa cartel, along with the stash of house located in Mexico. But the biggest discovery was that of the phone number of Mario Hidalgo, a bodyguard and personal assistant of El Chapo, who went by the alias El Naris and was a key part of the drug lord's inner circle. Mexico finally had the man it needed to lead them to El Chapo. Just hours after tracing El Naris' location, authorities swept on his home in Culiacan. He was arrested on his doorstep after returning from picking up dinner for El Chapo at a local restaurant, after which he was quickly taken into custody. El Naris broke. He told the authorities everything that he knew, including the information that El Chapo's whereabouts in Culiacan and several addresses where the cartel boss may be. All of that information was passed to the Mexican Navy, which tasked its Marines with conducting the raid that would bring El Chapo to justice. The first of those raids took place on February 17, 2014. Mexico's finest raided a property in the Colanes de San Miguel neighborhood that belonged to El Chapo's ex-wife. They did not find their target, although they destroyed several of the drug kingpin's belongings during the raid, but they weren't too worried. El Naris had already told them that El Chapo rarely spent more than a day at a single address, and they had several more on their list to investigate. It seemed like the Mexican Navy would not need all those addresses because El Chapo had made a critical mistake just before dawn on the day they raided his ex-wife's home. He turned on his cell phone.